filed a suit against the city, which then created an injunction and prevented them from acting on this. And he got the judge from the circuit court in Fairfax County to come out with him and to tour the segregated districts. But the judge refused to rule on the suit because there was a case coming before the Supreme Court that would decide the issue. In 1917, the case of Warley versus Buchanan ruled, the Supreme Court ruled that creating segregated districts to separate the races was unconstitutional. And that case was actually argued before the Supreme Court by the president of the NAACP at the time, a white lawyer from Boston named Moorfield Story. And he was the first president of the NAACP for the first 18 years of the organization.
Oh my goodness.
And another item you might be interested in, the first two meetings, we have the minutes, the handwritten minutes of the two meetings that took place in 1915. The first was held at the Joseph and Mary Tenner home over on Tenner Hill. It no longer exists, but that space is part of what we're calling the Tenner Hill Historic Site, which is being developed to share the history of the families that lived on the land and the civil rights pioneers who formed the organization that evolved to become the first rural chapter of the NAACP in the entire nation. So the first meeting took place there. The second meeting took place right here at 307 South Maple. And these are the handwritten minutes. There were 9 other men who took part in this meeting. They called themselves, 7 other. They called themselves the Committee of 9. And then they changed it to the Colored Citizens Protective League. And when they pooled their resources and they hired lawyers, they did printing of letters. Well, actually they mimeographed at that time, and these receipts show membership dues being paid and the cost of mimeographed flyers being paid for here. So when they pooled their resources to help move this forward, they also put their lives and their livelihoods on the line in order to fight against something that they felt was unfair. And while they were doing this, moving forward, they had hoped to become an actual branch of the NAACP. Well, at that time, all of the branches were in the cities, large urban areas, and Falls Church was rural. It was farmland, it was country, it was a small town. So there was some threat in terms of being identified as being a member of the NAACP. There was some concern about being able to have enough members to be a branch of the NAACP. So the response from the NAACP to this very forward-thinking group was, well, we don't have any rural branches, so why don't you just serve as a standing committee? So from 1915 until 1918, when the NAACP actually admitted a number of rural branches as full-fledged chapters, they served as a standing committee. Now, during the time that they were working as a standing committee, they not only addressed inequality, they addressed education, they pushed forward with utility access, mail service access, and a number of the things that they did helped to set a model for the rest of the branches in Virginia and across the United States. One of the tactics that they used was a disparity study, and that hadn't been done before. Mary Ellen Henderson used a disparity study in the late 1930s to get people to look at the difference between what African American children were being offered as public education and what white children were being offered as special education, public education. In fact, her study was based on the 1938 school year budget, and she was able to prove and to demonstrate that 97.3 cents of every education dollar was spent on educated white children, while only 2.7 cents was being spent on educating African American children. And with that information, she was able to have it distributed widely. It was printed in the newspapers. The headline read something like, "Our disgrace and our shame." And students, parents, administrators came together, black and white, and supported the effort. And they began to move forward towards having an equal educational facility constructed for African Americans. And in 1948, they were blessed to find we have a new school that had indoor and outdoor plumbing, had central heat, and clean and healthy facilities to be built on the site of what's now the James Lee Community Center.
They also had a classroom for each grade and an auditorium. She insisted on having an auditorium in the school, which is still there today.
So what kind of things did your grandfather have to deal with as far as voting? I've done a lot of oral histories in Northern Virginia, and I hear so many people say that Mr. Henderson helped to get the vote out. He would get people registered. He would tell people about it. Can you tell me a little bit about what was done with the voting?
Well, that was a big issue. One of the people that he worked with was Luther Jackson. Luther Jackson started an organization called the Virginia Voters League. And in the Virginia Voters League, they encouraged people to pay their poll taxes and make sure that they vote. Okay? E.B. Henderson knew the importance of voting, and therefore, with his work through the NAACP, they worked diligently to make sure that they got out the vote and that African Americans were educated on what the issues were and how they should vote.
So did your grandfather pay his poll tax?
Absolutely.
What was the poll tax?
I'm not sure exactly how much they had to pay as far as a poll tax, but we do have copies of a book, tax records from the City of Falls Church where people were actually paying their poll taxes. This is from like the 40s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But Luther Jackson was a person who was a good friend of E.B. and Mary Ellen Henderson. And I have several letters and his pamphlet from the Virginia Voters League. And a lot of people don't understand, even the people that attend Luther Jackson Middle School, his important work in voting, Luther Jackson's work in voting and in African American historical preservation through working with Carter G. Woodson. Luther Jackson was Carter G. Woodson's go-to guy.
Yeah.
Whenever he wanted something done, he would call Luther and ask him to do it for him.
Uh-huh.
Because he was a history professor at Virginia State University, or Virginia State College back then. I think my wife has something she wants to show you.
Okay.
We were talking about the poll taxes.
Yes.
And here we have, courtesy of the City of Falls Church, the book that shows who paid their taxes and who were able to vote.
That's amazing.
Is that the original book?
Yep.
So African Americans, when they wanted to vote in either the City of Falls Church or Fairfax County, they would have to prove that they had paid their poll tax,
That's correct.
and they also had to do a literacy test, correct?
I don't know that they had to do literacy tests here in Virginia. I know that my mother was subjected to one in Alabama when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And really with the literacy test, it didn't matter what you put down or if you even write. You know, and many of the questions were, just nonsensical questions and degrading questions like how many niggas does it take to screw in a light bulb, or how many peas are there in a car. And whatever you put down would be wrong, and that went straight in the trash can.
Mm-hmm.
And whites were not subject to a literacy test, regardless of how illiterate they might have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how well did your family members, did they work a lot with, say, Fairfax County African Americans? Was there this crossing between the families, with schooling, education, those type of things?
Some of the names.